What are sessions, right? If you remember, back in the HTTP headers, back in like the request response cycle, there is like a GET request that starts this cycle, right? I'm gonna first go to something like google.com, right? Or I'm gonna go to facebook.com, right? And what's gonna happen is, in that request, I'm gonna ask for information. The server's gonna send me back something called headers, right? And inside headers, you have like HTTP version 1.1, you have like what kind of like language it's encoded in, right? What kind of data it accepts, like JSON or something. And then also somewhere in there are something known as cookies. Cookies are nothing more than just a key value pair, right? Just like a hash. It's just like an object in JavaScript that can store data, right? So let's take a look at one of those. So if I were to go to, well, this is Flavortown, but let's go to a real website, a cooler website, say Google, right? And I were to open the DevTools, I could see something under application. Man, that is distracting. I can check out something called cookies, bloop. All right, and right here, if I were to open this up, google.com has their own cookies. They're all just key value pairs, right? So this is the name, this is the key, and this is the value of it. Who can tell me what this actually says? Nobody, right? Because they're encrypted. They're designed to be encrypted because as you pass information back and forth, you do not want your data exposed to the user because you can just read the cookie as it is. So it needs to be encrypted. It needs to be hashed, and it needs to be non-human readable. Because if I'm passing data back and forth every single time, I could be passing in things like a username, right? Maybe some sort of session ID to keep track of which user is currently logged in, like what Ruth mentioned earlier. And so inside this cookie, right, which is passed back and forth, Rails will build something for you called a session, right? So cookies is just key value pairs. They're just objects. Yeah.
You're out of that, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna take this right after.
So inside, right, inside this cookie, which is just key value pairs, right, I can easily throw in something, right, like a session. And then inside this could be like encrypted data that comes from Rails that keeps track of what I want it to keep track of inside my session. So think of it as just like a nested hash, right? The cookies is here, and then inside is another key value pair which points to the session. And Rails will build this for you, and we will explore this here shortly. Couple things to note, that each one of these domains will have different cookies. So if I were to go to google.com, I see Google's cookies. If I were to go to, say, GitHub, will I see Google's cookies inside GitHub? Of course not. That would be ludicrous, right? That'd be wild. So inside, I have GitHub's cookies on GitHub's domain. And here, you can already see it has something called user session. All right? Why would it have something like that? It's probably because I'm like logged in, right? The picture's kind of small, but that's me, right? Like, kind of ugly, so just like shrink it up a little bit. But I'm logged in because there's some sort of user session here. I could see that already. Does that make sense so far? So sessions, again, just to summarize, it's just a key value store, right, that Rails builds for you that goes inside the cookie, which is built by the server and gets passed back and forth between every single request. Cool? All right. All right. So let's take you back to Flavortown one last time, and let's build something with that. So usually session is used for something called logging in, right? And you will find plenty of tutorials that can kind of teach you that, but you could take these exact same concepts and I'll kind of like allude to them as I'm teaching you about these sessions. Cool? So we're not really going to refer to cookie anymore. We're just going to be talking about sessions because that's what Rails builds. All right? So cookies just pass back and forth between the responses. Sessions goes inside the cookie, and we will be dealing with the session because that's the Rails land that we work in. Cool? It allows us to sneak data into the cookie that gets passed back and forth. Sweet. So besides user login, something else sessions can be used for is your shopping cart. Yes.
I just wanted to understand what data is actually in the cookie from the user. Like, is it just tracks? I know it tracks data, but like passwords and
Not necessarily passwords, just
where they
key value pairs, right? So like if you gave consent, I guess, to
Oh,
accept cookies from Google,
right.
right?
Notice that.
Probably some secure socket layers information, right? Like anything encrypted, right? Whether or not you're logged in, cool. Possibly a username, cool. Awesome. So what I want to do is I want to build this shopping cart for you, right? We want to build this e-commerce store because when you really think about it, when you're clicking around on Amazon, right, and you check out your shopping cart, or you're on like Nike.com or something and you see your shopping cart on the side, that stays with you every single request, right? Like I'm just gonna go to, hey, I'm gonna check out these Timbs, right? Great, awesome. Let me add it to my cart. Hey, now I wanna check out these sweet Nikes, or I wanna pick up some Yeezys. I don't know what shoes are popular today, right? Do I lose the information from my shopping cart? No, it's still there. So how do I keep track of it? Wouldn't it be nice if there was something that was passed back and forth that I can sneak some data in, that I can keep track of that information every single request, right? We learned about something like this, except it didn't pass every single request. It only passed one time. And what was that? It's the flash hash. It persisted data from one request to the next only for one request. Now, session will allow you to persist data every single request because it's being passed back and forth inside the cookie. Cool? So that's just the conceptual part of it. Let's see it in action. Let's make it work, right? Let me just blow this up a little bit. I have a cart here, right? And all I did was just add a little border here so you kind of see. I mean, I could put it to the side, but it's a little bit easier this way, right? What I want to do, right, is take a look and see add to cart. Imagine this button did not say make this button work. That's for you guys. And it said add to cart. What would I want to happen here when I click this button? Well, the first thing is I want it to go into my cart here. And then if I were to refresh or maybe click another one, I would have the other one also added to my cart, right? That's essentially what this shopping cart is doing. No matter where I go inside my website, inside my application, I will have this data, right? So let's think about it. If I were to click this button, right, knowing what we know about Rails, knowing that we can easily assume that there's some sort of Nacho controller, right? Based on this route, based on what I could see here, I'm on the Nachos index page. I can just assume that. Now, I want to click this button, and I want it to hit a particular controller action, because that's what buttons do, that's what forms do. It submits data, right? Now, let me think about this. Do I want to create brand new data in this cart, or do I want to update or edit information in my cart? Which one would it be if I were to click the button? Let's think this through. If I were to add and create a new cart every single time I click this button, would that be effective? I probably want to have some sort of cart already that exists. So every time I hit this button, add to cart, what I'm really doing is editing the cart. And that means like adding something onto it. That's some sort of edit, right? That just makes sense to me. If I'm editing the cart, right, we also know that these are nothing but forms. And there's going to be some sort of post action. But if I'm talking about editing, what should this be? It should be a patch, right? So let's make this patch request. The first thing I want to think about is in this form, I want to know where it's submitting to. Luckily for you, because I didn't want to waste your time, I've already built out a cart controller with some particular comments that I want to walk you through. And then just by the comments, just by what something makes sense, let's see if we can build it out together. So I have something, right, called the Nacho controller, which you know, right? It's just index and show. And I built something called the carts controller. Don't mind this K one. This was me messing around, and I didn't want to like lose the data. I just renamed it to cart with a K. I have this carts controller. All I want to do is update my cart, right? So the first thing I want to do inside my cart is, first, these are just best practices. Can I hit this route? I want to drop this buy bug to see if I can hit the route. Cool, let's do this. Sweet. So first I want to do, right, this is just good process. I'm trying to teach you process here because during the assessment there was a lot of code that was being written, but there wasn't a lot of like testing, right? You should be testing as you go. Otherwise, as I'm sure you found, trying to test everything at the end becomes a nightmare because if one thing is broken, it might break something else. But then that code might be good, but you're not sure because something before it's broken, and then maybe there's a typo afterwards, and then the whole thing becomes like really hard to control. So write a little bit of code, test it, make sure it works, and then keep going, right? That short feedback loop. So I'm gonna drop a buy bug in here just to see if I can hit this route. That's just good practice. The next thing I wanna do is inside my cart controller, I wanna be able to add a nacho to my cart. That just makes sense to me, right? Like inside my cart controller, I'm gonna take this nacho object and add it to this cart object, right? This is just the idea that I'm like thinking about here. The next thing is I wanna let the user know what happened, right? Some sort of like, congratulations, this trash can nacho has been added to your cart. And then ultimately, I wanna redirect to the index because I wanna show that it's actually there. Cool? Because my cart right now exists inside my index, as we've seen. Are there any questions as to like how I'm thinking about this, how I'm trying to approach it? Yeah.
What are the attributes of this cart object?
What are the attributes of this cart object? That's a very good question, right? The question is, what are the attributes of the cart object? Well, let's think about it. The cart. The cart itself, what is the cart if I were to pick a data structure? Should my shopping cart be a string? Should it be a number? Should it be an array? Or should it be a hash? What would make sense to you if I'm just holding on to a bunch of objects? And a what? I heard like in a rash. So like you're blurring them. Nice try. You're like writing. You're that kid that like writes true, but it looks like false on the paper, so you can't be wrong. Right. Well, we're on the right path in the sense that a string and a number don't make sense. It should at least be, at a minimum, an array, maybe a hash. Well, let's think about it like this. If I were to pick array, what would I store inside the array? Probably just either the cart objects, the nacho objects themselves, or like a reference to them, like the nacho ID, right? If I were to put it inside a hash, what would I put inside the hash? What would be the key? What would be the value? Well, I could put the nacho ID and point it to the actual nacho object. I could do that, but that seems really redundant. It seems like I'm storing the number and the object when I can just reference the object in and of itself by the ID.
Quantity. You can do like the nacho object and then quantity. How many of those there are required? Or is there like two?
We'll think it through, right? If I were to put an object and the quantity, how would I, I'm trying to think. If I were to do that, what would be the benefit to doing something like that?
That's just, I'm thinking about the feature of the card itself.
Yeah.
Cards, if you add like multiple objects of the same item to your card, they don't display as 3 or 4 separate records. They're just one record with 4 quantities or I don't know if this is like part of this.
No, it's fine. I'm trying to like get you to figure it out, because if you can come up with the idea, right, and it makes sense to you, building it will be no problem, right? You could, and we'll get to that idea later on. But for right now, let's just use an array and just store the items, right? I want to hit this update. How do I hit this update? With my form. Let's take a look at my index. Okay. I have an index here, right? Loop. I have an index here, and I want to make this button work. If you remember the button 2, the first thing I should do is obviously change this to add to cart, smiley face. What is the next argument for this button 2? It's the submission path, right? Very good. So what is the submission path? How do I hit update? How do I hit this cart controller with an update method? What would determine what controller action I hit?
Method patch.
The routes. The routes would determine what controller action I hit. So if I were to go to routes, I can build something, a patch as we discussed, right? To slash carts. This could be any really route you want, right? It's just ultimately what the form is going to hit. So take a look. I wanted to hit this update method that I built in my carts controller. And I want to name it add nacho to cart. That's just like the helper method that I'm building here. So if I'm going to patch to slash carts, how would I update my form to hit this route? Add nacho to cart path. Cool? Sorry. If I were to do this, that would mean that when I click the button, it should hit this carts controller, this update. Are there any questions as like why I wrote this custom route to hit a custom method in a separate controller? Great. So if that's the case, then I should be able to refresh, make sure that I'm checking my form to see what's going on. Will this work?
You have the update? I mean, refresh it.
I did. So if I hit add to cart,
I thought you said it has to be a pattern.
yes, right? Here, what am I looking for inside my form? Is this the patch request? It's not. So I need to make it the patch request. I can simply pass it extra arguments to tell it exactly what I want it to do. And that is, my method is going to be patch. Now if I refresh, I should see something like a post with the underscore method patch. So if I were to hit add to cart, I should hang right here. And I should, in fact, hit the buy bug. Cool? If I were to do that, I can always check my params. And notice, I'm getting what I want. What we talked about earlier is I want to be able to, right, add a nacho to this cart. The only way I could do that, really, is I need the params. I need the params to have something called like nacho ID or something like that, right? In order for me, when I'm inside this update, to actually add it to my cart. So far, so good? This is like kind of what I'm imagining I need. So if that's the case, let me do this. I need to find or add in my nacho ID into the params here. Inside the button to, there are additional arguments I can pass it. And that is the params argument with a key value pair. Here I want something called nacho ID, pass through, And remember, I'm still in this iteration. I have the nacho object. I want this nacho ID to be the nacho's ID. Let me hit save, and let me run that. I'm sorry, I need to continue. Cool. Now let me add to cart again, and check my params. Here I now have the nacho ID, because I added it in the params of my form. I can also add, if I wanted to, right, something like the nacho name. And that's going to point to the nacho.name because I'm just calling the name on this nacho object. I'm passing it in as a nacho name to my key value pair for my params. And so all my params, when I click this button, I should get the nacho ID. Where's the nacho name? Oh, I didn't refresh, sorry. I'm getting the nacho ID and the nacho name. Right? That's coming out as params. So I can simply do params, right, with the nacho ID. And now I have 8. I can also do ask for the nacho name, and I get trash can nachos. Now, what I can do with that information, because I'm in the bybug, in the update, I can simply do, all right, we talked about Flash, right? Flash is just a regular old hash that I can add key value pairs to. Earlier I said Flash only persists for 1. We have another hash that allows us to persist data from request to request. This is not as small. The session hash has a lot of this data in it. Cool? It's everything about this particular session. If you look really closely, it talks about like cross origin, protecting against cross-site scripting attacks. You have, what else? Authenticity token, and I passed it earlier, but the params are also in there. I can do anything I want. Session, it's just a hash. I can add a key of something random, something like that, right? And then I can assign it a value. So let me do that. I want this persist, so I put session with a key of, like, let's say nacho ID. And I want that to be the params nacho ID. So now if I were to call session, I have something called nacho ID in there. And that nacho ID is getting passed back and forth between every single request. Now I want to let the user know what happened. And so I can simply give them some sort of message, right? I want that message to last one time because I'm just going to be like, hey, you added it to the cart. I don't want that message always and forever. Just want it one time. Also going back, any key value pair I want. And this could just be like, hey, you added. And then this could just be params of nacho name, right? To your cart. And then finally, I'm going to redirect to the nacho path. Easiest line of code ever, right? Redirect to, and that is the nacho path. Nacho's path. If I get rid of the bybug, and I were to refresh, ready? I should see some sort of message. Oh, that's right. This is the Flash message being passed in to the index, right? Which then renders the view. So now this view needs, yeah, right? If Flash message, not error, right? Just be careful of like pattern matching, right? Like I named this message, so I want to make sure I call it here. So just simply display what that Flash message is inside maybe like a p tag or something. So if I were to refresh, hey, you added trash can nachos to your cart. I can click this. Hey, you added the mac and cheese nachos to your cart. That's just simply the message. I haven't added anything to anything yet, really. But I do have this nacho ID inside my session now.
How did you access the session hash hash again?
Just session. In the same way, I just accessed the flash hash.
No, I mean, how did you see it on in your terminal?
When I was in the debug, I just literally said session.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Nice. Yeah.
So for the Nacho ID, if we change the form to just get the Nacho, like the object instead of the ID, then params, it would be params Nacho, or that params, or the session Nacho ID would equal the object instead of the number.
Yes, you don't want to be passing in objects because objects hold a ton of data. Also, if you pass the object all the way through, right, what winds up happening is this gets sent, the object gets sent in the session, which goes into the cookie, which goes actually to touch the user. You want as little information to touch the user as possible. All I want to do is tell the user, hey, I'm going to be calling on Nacho 4. No big deal. Or I'm going to be calling on user 77. Right? You just want that ID, because then in the back end, you can be like, hey, what is user 77? Great, it's Megan. Cool. Right? You don't want to be passing it in. Also, cookies can only store strings. So that is like a limitation to cookies. That's why, again, just the ID would suffice. Cool? Yeah.
Yeah, if you, I made this mistake before. If you try to flash an active record object, what you get back won't be an active record object. It'll just be the parameters.
Correct. Yeah. Flash won't take that. It doesn't like it. Cool. All right. So moving on. In my cart, right? Let's think through. I have a cart, and I know that it's going to be an array. Do I want my cart, which is an array, inside my cart controller? This is a little tricky because let's think about this. Let's think carefully. Right now, I only have one controller, and that's called Nachos. If Flavortown decided to expand and maybe sell hamburgers and hot dogs, I'm sorry, I'm very hungry. That's all I can think about right now. And I wanted access to the cart, right? In the same way that Nike sells t-shirts, sneakers, weightlifting gear, right? Those are all completely different controllers that you imagine. I want the shopping cart to be accessible universally by every single controller. Does all my controllers inherit from the cart controller, or does it inherit from the application controller? So if I wanted this cart to be accessible by every single controller, where would I want my cart, where would I want the array to be? Application controller, right? So let's go there. Great. I've listed some things out to do here. First thing is I want a method for cart. I want actually ultimately something like cart equals to an empty array. I want to be able to create this empty array. So let's do this, right? It's good to just make these methods. We'll just call it cart. And all I'm going to do here is do something like the session, right, with the key of what? Cart equals to an empty array. That way, if I call cart here, is that an undefined method or variable? No, it exists. And all it's going to return is an array. The problem is it's always going to assign it to be the array every time I call it. What I want to do is something like, let's say, if, right, this session cart exists, then I want it to return, then I want it to be session cart, otherwise session cart is an empty array. What this is saying is, hey, does this exist? If it does, give it back to me. If it doesn't, make sure it's an array. Because you'll run into this error. You've probably seen it in Mod 1. If you did something like session cart equals, without this, whenever I call cart, session cart will always zero back to empty array. So you can refactor this code into something like session at a key of cart. And this is a design pattern, is a practice called memoization. And that is, this session cart is an empty array or equals. What this is saying is, Yes, exactly. If the session cart exists, return it. Otherwise, make it an empty array in this one-liner. It's called memoization. Cool? Okay, great. The next thing I want to do is, I want now, right? So now I have a cart. The next thing I want to do is, I want to be able to add a nacho to this cart. That makes sense to me. So, something simple like, I don't know, add nacho to cart. Let's not overcomplicate ourselves in here. The first thing I want to do is, if you remember, inside this cart controller, I did something like session equals to params nacho ID. That's not very effective because what's happening here? This is always going to assign. I know that this, right, is actually this. These two are exactly the same, except I have this or equals here. So can I call a method within a method? And do I want it assigned or do I want it added into? All right? Do I have access to params inside my application controller? Kind of not really. I mean, I do, but I don't really want to be doing that. I want to be somehow adding this nacho ID into the cart. Does that make sense? Where would I call this method that has access to nacho ID? Inside the update, right? Remember, application controller has a method called add nacho to cart, and cart's controller inherits from application controller. I can simply do add nacho to cart, but which nacho ID? It needs a nacho ID. It needs the params nacho ID. So now I'm calling add nacho to cart with a nacho ID, and all that's going to do is shovel onto my empty array. The last thing I do is, now that I have a cart, I have nacho ID inside it, I need it to display. That makes sense. Display this. So, real quick, ready? Display nacho cart. Cool? And what that's going to do is simply get the nachos with the cart and pass it to the controller to view. All right? That's really all it's doing. That makes sense, right? I have this cart. I need to pass it into the view. Cool. So, first thing I know is, I know in order to pass something to the view, I need the instance variable, right? So, at maybe like cart items equals to the cart itself, right? All that's going to do right here is give me an array. That's not super useful. I want to be able to do something like nacho.find everything inside this cart, which is tricky, but let's take a look real quick. Let's go into, if we want to, into the Rails console and see, nacho.all. I have all of these nacho objects, right? Can I do nacho.find object 1? Yes. Can I do nacho.find 1 and 2? Yes. So if I pass in an array into nacho.find, this instance variable now is a collection of nacho objects. So far, so good? Awesome. Remember, I'm redirecting to the nachos path. And I have display nacho cart. So, where would I want to call display nacho cart? Inside the update? Or maybe inside my nachos controller, I want to display the nacho cart. Because remember, application controller is here. It's being inherited. It has access to this. It's giving me this instance variable called cart items right here. So in my index, I should have something here called cart items. All right, dot each, because it's an array. We made that do with a nacho object. Let me just slide this over. I think this needs to be outside the ordered list. And then I'm simply going to do in here the nacho.name. And then I'm going to end it. So let's see if that worked. I think I might have missed something, but I'll figure it out. Trash can nachos. Mac and cheese nachos. I think it's because I did it. Oh yeah, I'm so stupid. These need to be list items. So I can add chicken pot pie nachos. I think I'm doing the ordered list wrong.
I think the OL has to be outside of the
Maybe the end. There we go. And then
the entire loop has to be inside both the OLs.
yeah? That sounds bizarre to me, but we'll take a look. Cool. There we go. I can add deluxe nachos. I can hit refresh. I can go to a show page. I can go back to all nachos and they'll still be there. Also, I can open a, what is it? I don't know how to do this. Incognito tab. I can go to localhost 3000 to nachos, which is a different request. And just to see, my cart is empty. I can simply go into the application, go into cookies, blast them, refresh, and my session is gone, so my cart is gone. Are there any questions about the session hash, how it's used to persist data from request to request, how it's different in each client, so like different browsers, what a cookie is, and ultimately how to implement them? Awesome, that's all I got for you today.